D&D players and DMS of Reddit, what's your best okay, I'll allow it story? The party was in the dungeons of a castle and the dungeons were full of wraiths that we needed to kill because they would drop magic skulls needed to complete a puzzle, something we didn't realize until later. The rogue had a bag of devouring in his possession. He held it open, grabbed one of the wraiths, and forced it into the bag. DM eloquently describes the occurrence as a screeching, followed by a crunching sound coming from the bag. Fast forward to when we actually need these skulls, party is struggling hard trying to figure out this puzzle. We try everything up to and including smashing the skulls, which the DM says are indestructible. DM finally hints that we're missing a skull. We realize that it was going to be the skull dropped by the wraith that was shoved into the bag. We crack open the D&D manuals and read up on bags of devouring, and the DM reads aloud that any creature that ends its turn inside the bag is devoured and all traces of it are consumed. We respond with, but you said the skulls were indestructible. DM pauses a moment and says, the skull falls out of the bag, and we cheer in triumph. The party was in a theater, so they didn't have their weapons. They were looking for someone infected by a heart shard of fear, and they eventually found it. A battle ensued. The Goliath barbarian said he'll pick up a couch from the set and smash it into the enemy. I've always been a rule of cool DM, so I said fluff it, sure. He rolled high, so I allowed the couch to deal 2d10 damage. It also broke to pieces in the process. The time when the barbarian smashed a couch into a wraith is still one of the high moments of that campaign. My cousin joined our group for a single session. We set him up with a solid character for his one-shot adventure, figured the group would enjoy traveling with a generous, heavily armed veteran. He ends up wrestling a hostile wizard to the ground. He had thought to negate the spellcasting by tackling him, all in all not a terrible idea. His grapple checks went better than expected and he decides he can end the fight himself, so he says, I pull out my garrote and strangle the fool. I remember his character sheet fairly well, I wrote the darn thing. Where did you find a garrote? You said yourself this character came with a brand new robe of useful things. A garrote is a useful thing, ergo I have one. Okay, I will allow it. Quote, my group was adventuring in a crypt and came across some ritual oil. We took it thinking we may need to create some kind of explosion to clear the way ahead. Our barbarian, with 18 strength, was the one carrying it. Even put some rope into them to make them like giant Molotov cocktails. We get down a little further into the crypt and find a coffin sealed with a heavy stone top. Barbarian puts the oil down to push the top off and, unsurprisingly, gets jumped by a vampire. Barbarian rolled poorly on initiative, but one of the other team members used their round to ignite the rope. Cue the light bulb for the barbarian. His turn finally comes around, he grapples the vampire, which is a feat in and of itself, and suplexes him directly into the urn. Lots of fire darnage for both of them. We were playing a 4-year-long campaign where the Undercity was trying to take over the surface realm. Our rogue, who was leaving the group strapped on every magic item he had at his disposal, gave the cleric a kiss and stepped through his portable gateway to the Undercity. He had a few scrolls of haste and a cursed object that would cause all items to explode if exposed to haste. He planned it for months and turned himself into a huge magic bomb, destroying the whole Undercity. The rogue wasn't the only thing killed. Rip my inbox. In a game of Call of Cthulhu, think D&D, but Lovecraftian and set in the real world in the 1920s, my players were hunting down a wizard who had switched bodies with a college student and was now going around town killing the descendants of those who originally imprisoned him. The adventure is called The Condemned for any fellow keepers. They had managed to steal a book from the wizard's lair and leave a message to meet them at a nearby airfield to negotiate terms to trade the book for giving the student's body back. The investigators intended to betray him, however, and capture him with the help of the local PD. Little did they know the wizard was planning a surprise for them. They have a day or so to get ready for the meeting, so one of my players, who was a former Great War fighter pilot, asked if he could call his mechanic to prep up his plane and fly it down to Arkham, the town they were in. The player had rolled pretty well on his credit rating skill, which determines affluence, so I figured it wasn't unreasonable for him to have maybe owned the plane he used in the war or bought it afterwards. He then says, "Oh, and Frank, go ahead and mount up the Browning while you're at it. I got a bad feeling about this meet." That's when the player, and the rest of the table, gives me the look. The look that says, "Is he going to go along with it?" I decided that, yes, your character does have a machine gun mounted to his plane. I'll even throw in a few crates of ammo to boot. The reason I allowed it was because the wizard had a spell called Summon, Bind, Hunting Horror that I really wanted to use on my players, but felt it was a little too unfair. What followed was a glorious battle that was by far one of my favorite times running a game. A motorcycle chase, a player being swallowed whole, while wearing a ring granting immunity to kinetic damage in exchange for her sanity, with the intent of shooting it from the inside, a dogfight between an airplane and basically a dragon, with the cherry on top being the pilot catching the swallowed player on the wing of his plane after banishing the horror back to its plane of existence. What a fluffing evening. Later on they just ended up shooting the wizard in the back with both barrels of a sawed-off shotgun. My party was going up against a Medusa who had already petrified our paladin. Our barbarian had an idea. He covered himself with some old armor that had belonged to the Medusa's long-dead husband. Barbarian barges in booming, "I have possessed this mortal body my love." Our DM said she would allow it with a high enough persuasion check. Alas, our barbarian has cursed dice. We found a ruined palace in the jungle and ended up killing the queen who lived there. She was a Gorgon, Medusa, so it was a hard fight, and we were looking forward to looting her place when we won, but since all the valuables were corroded or stolen long ago there was no actual treasure to be had. Over her dead body, I said, and cut her head off to keep as a trophy. Fast forward to when we're running through a ruined city with a giant froghemoth stomping after us. Well, I was playing a necromancer cleric and, after getting the DM to allow it, pulled the Gorgon's head out of my pack, held it toward the Titan, and resurrected it with all the unholy power I could muster. It blasted out a ray of petrification like a perfect reenactment of Perseus saving Andromeda, and blistered its flesh to stone through several rounds of sustained casting. The head was deteriorated to useless shreds after channeling so much energy, but the froghemoth was defeated, and it was such an epic moment. My friend wanted to lick the floor for research purposes as a barbarian. The DM said sure, YTF not, roll for insight, and he got a nat 20. Apparently that nat 20 allowed him to notice the three monsters that were about 120-ish feet in front of us. By the way, it was in a cave. Not a DM, just witness to god-tier levels of luck. My buddies and I play a Fallout D&D campaign, and we have 2 different campaigns going right now. At the very start of the second one, we woke up in a run-down factory. We encountered a sentry that was not hostile unless we entered a certain room. My buddy decided that he wanted to hack the bot to turn into a companion. Our DM said he needed to roll intelligence, science, and repair. Natural 20s for all 3, and we pretty much broke the campaign because the sentry bot deals fluffing insane darnage. Too good not to post. This was probably 10 years ago, so details are a wee bit fuzzy. We were playing a campaign as a group of friends for the first time, with a couple of new players. As we build our characters, one of our friends decides she's going to play as a halfling. She decided that as part of the standard kit, she had a bucket and rope, so she spent all her money having spikes added to the bucket, and tying the rope onto it. A boat, a grappling hook, a drinking, bathing vessel, a flail, a helmet, an elevator. It was all these things, and possibly more. It was literally her multi-tool in the campaign, and became a huge joke of how she was going to use the bucket in any difficult situation. It was a ton of fun. The DM let it go, but he had to do some hard figuring to determine its characteristics and roles and all that. And then he killed us all. Not right away, but after many sessions, when one of our friends led us down a path he didn't want us to go down, and we kept finding ways through his challenges. I only just got back into D&D. A friend of mine convinced our DM to let him play a minotaur who was raised by gnomes and thought he was gnome. So we were fighting a lick at the end of the campaign. We were 9 incredibly overpowered experienced players who min-maxed the hell out of their characters. So the DM decided to make this mean as possible. He gave the Lich a sphere of annihilation. For those who do not know, if you are touched by the sphere, you instantly cease to exist. There's no saving throw or roll. If it enters your space, you cease to exist. You don't die, you cease to exist, so no resurrection. So the Lich killed 6 of us in a handful of turns. That was when the fighter and the rogue turned to each other and said, "We are going to sacrifice ourselves by grappling it and pushing the Lich into the sphere of annihilation." So, they grappled him, Lichs have terrible strength, and then suplexed him into the sphere. DM reads the sphere's item description and realized it's only a few feet in diameter, so they both made their saving throws and survived. Edit for those doubting the story, this is Tomb of Annihilation where there's kind of an entire subplot of disintegration items. I don't know if the DM altered the item but the other players seemed familiar with it too. Yeah, looks like the DM changed it. This was the only way the fight would have been remotely challenging. We would have completely destroyed him otherwise.